A black wall lurches toward you. You run as fast as you can to try and reach the safety of your barn. You glance over your shoulder as the 2-mile-high wall of dust and sand gains on you. The storm is like a giant creature trying to swallow you. You put your head down and will your legs to run faster. Sweat pours down your forehead as you dive into the open door of the barn. You grab the door and slide it closed. Just before the door closes completely, you get one last glimpse of the black wall approaching. The dust seems to smile at you as it slams into the barn. Unfortunately, this was a common occurrence for farmers in the Great Plains during the Dust Bowl. In the 1930s, huge storms of dust and sand were swept up and carried across the nation. The storms themselves were caused by high winds in the Great Plains area of the United States, which consists of southeastern Colorado, southwestern Kansas, and the panhandles of Texas and Oklahoma, and northeastern New Mexico. The winds were not the only factor that caused these massive dust storms. It was a mix of wind and uncontrolled and harmful farming practices. This led to soil losing its nutrients and becoming eroded. Eroded soil does not cling to the ground and therefore turns to light, dry dust particles, which are easily swept up by the wind. As the wind gathers more and more eroded soil, the dust storm it creates gets larger and larger. Eventually, the colossal dust storm can be so powerful that it swallows whole farms, towns, and cities. The damage and destruction these storms cause is scary. But what is even more alarming is the shortage of food during the time of the Dust Bowl. The Great Plains grew huge amounts of crops for the United States and was home to most of the cattle farms. The entire nation began to go hungry because of what happened during the Dust Bowl. Prices for meat and crops skyrocketed. The average person could barely afford to put food on the table. How did we get out of this time of food shortages? What specifically caused the Dust Bowl? Is there another Dust Bowl and food shortage coming? And what can we do to prevent it? Some answers to these questions will be nice to hear. Other answers may leave you nervous for what may be coming. But stay with us as we examine the likelihood of another Dust Bowl-related food shortage and how to prepare for it. There were two main causes for the Dust Bowl and food shortages of the 1930s. The first was a 10-year drought that dried up much of the Great Plains region of the nation. There's nothing humans can do to prevent a drought, it's just a natural process of climate and weather patterns. The other cause was poor farming practices. Inexperienced farmers were promised land and fortunes to move out west and tame the wild country. The Homestead Act of 1862 provided 160 acres of land to anyone who relocated west. This led to people who had no experience in agriculture receiving acres and acres of land to farm and graze cattle on. These new farmers allowed their cattle to overgraze, which destroyed the natural grasses that replenish nutrients to the soil. They also overproduced crops such as wheat and corn, which required a lot of water and depleted the nutrients from the soil quickly. These two practices together caused the once fertile soils of the Great Plains to become little more than dust and sand. Without fertile soil, wind could whip up the dirt and blow it across the country. Although we now have regulations and oversight for farming practices to reduce the risk of another Dust Bowl, things are becoming eerily similar to what happened in the 1930s. But how harmful could dust storms really be, though? I mean, after all, it's only dust and sand, right? You can find those things under the couch in your house. Well, imagine that small pile of dust and sand under your couch and then make it 2 miles high. Now imagine it being blown 60 miles per hour across the land. That was what a dust storm was like during the 1930s. They were so huge that some of the walls of dust covered more than 75% of the United States. Storms that started in the Oklahoma Panhandle could travel 2,000 miles all the way to the East Coast. These dust storms were reported to have blotted out the Statue of Liberty and the U.S. Capitol building. Some dust storms even covered ships sailing in the Atlantic Ocean. That's a long way from Oklahoma. Then on April 14, 1935, Black Sunday occurred. Imagine you're plowing the fields trying to get the crops to grow that the people of the United States desperately need. People are starving. There just isn't enough food to go around because of the massive drought and dust storms in the Great Plains. And you look on the horizon and you see a black blizzard heading toward you. 3 million tons of topsoil are being carried by the wind toward the east. You drop what you're doing and you seek shelter. You shutter the house as the dust storm slams into it. The winds are blowing over 60 miles per hour and the shutters get ripped off their hinges. Your windows shatter and blow inward as you and your family hunker down in the bathtub. The storm lasts hours. You're unable to tell if it's day or night because the dust has blocked all the sunlight. Suddenly, the wind lets up and light enters through what used to be a window, but now is just a huge hole in the house. It's the next day, and Black Sunday has become Monday. The damage to your house and farm is immense. Like so many other farmers during this time, you have to move either to California or back to the East Coast to start your life over. At this point in the 1930s, there is practically no food being grown or cattle being raised in the country. Food shortages are felt everywhere. Plus, large populations of people are out of work and have relocated. A real national crisis is at hand, and the government starts turning public lands into new farming and grazing areas with strict regulations. They've learned from the time of the Dust Bowl that farming practices must be done sustainably, grazing must be managed, and time must be given to allow the soils to replenish their nutrients. The government also issues policies to stabilize the prices of food and make it affordable. This helps some people, but not all. Relief organizations are given federal funds to help the most economically disadvantaged in the country. Farmers and their families who lost everything during the Dust Bowl are among this group. But that was all in the past, right? Wrong. Today, the Great Plains is seeing a drought worse than the time of the Dust Bowl. What does this mean for that region of the country? Will there be more dust storms? Will the nation run out of food again? If we're not careful, the answer to these questions is yes. As of 2014, dust storms in the Great Plains have become more frequent. Their winds have been clocked at 62.3 miles per hour. Since around 2010, the Great Plains have been in a drought. There's no sign that the rain patterns will change anytime soon. Unfortunately, this is one of the byproducts of climate change. As the Earth's temperatures rise, weather patterns and climates shift. The Great Plains may be experiencing what will become the norm in rainfall for that region. All of the states in the Great Plains have had less rain in recent years than in the same amount of time during the 1930s. This does not bode well for the region. Like during the Dust Bowl, cattle are currently being sold to markets early because there is not enough grass for them to eat. Fields of crops are becoming covered with infertile dust and sand, which is causing wheat and corn plants to die. This has lowered crop yields in that part of the country. These conditions may very well lead to a shortage of food, similar to what we saw in the 1930s. So what does this mean for the US and the rest of the world? If history is any indication and patterns we are seeing remain, then a food shortage in the United States is a very real possibility. This may mean that the United States will have to import more crops than it currently does. If this happens, the US may become more reliant on other countries for the things it currently produces and could lead to further national debt. Another option could be the United States refuses to import more food and people are forced to pay higher prices. Those who cannot afford to pay the high prices will be affected the most. Other organizations may have to step in to provide relief, similar to what happened in the 1930s. If we keep doing business as usual in the Great Plains, instead of allowing the lands to replenish their nutrients, the US could end up with another Dust Bowl and a food shortage all over again. Luckily, the United States has made it through one Dust Bowl and has learned from its mistakes. Hopefully. The government subsidizes large amounts of farmland so that farmers can leave it unplanted and allow for the soil to regain its nutrients. Programs for sustainable grazing have been put into place to ensure that cattle don't destroy the land they graze on. However, sometimes this is not enough. Farmers still need to grow crops to make ends meet. They plow deeper and deeper trenches to plant the crops. And the hope is that deeper trenches will keep the dust and the sand from blowing up into the air by the wind. If it rains before a windstorm, this works great. If there's a drought like the one currently happening in the region, the soil's nutrients are depleted and dust storms will be worse the following year. Worse dust storms means less crops. Less crops means food shortages. Now let's imagine a world where there is a Dust Bowl round 2. The year is 2030. Drought continues in the Great Plains because of climate change. The United States government decided to play the short game and rolled back the regulations on farming policies. This allowed farmers and cattle handlers to exploit the land to create vast amounts of food to feed the nation. It worked really well for the next couple of years. There was plenty of meat and crops to go around, but then the soil ran out of nutrients. Grasses for cattle to eat did not regrow. Nutrients to grow crops did not replenish. The Great Plains is now a desolate desert that produces nothing but dust storms. People around the nation go hungry. The government cannot provide enough food using its own land, so it imports crops. Prices grow exponentially as other countries who also need to feed their citizens raise their crop prices. People begin to starve to death in the United States as the government can't afford to import enough crops. We all know what's coming next. The US goes to war as it tries to claim the resources the country needs to feed its starving citizens. This may seem extreme, but think about what you'd be willing to do if you and your family were starving and hadn't had a good meal in weeks. But now let's imagine a different scenario, one that's more realistic and gives us hope. The year is 2030. The United States learned from past mistakes, and the government planned for a more sustainable future. The US pays farmers to take land that has been badly eroded by overgrazing or overfarming and let it lay fallow. This allows nutrients to be replenished and farmers to stay in business. By starting this practice back in 2020, the land has been kept fertile. Using land in a rotating fashion allows plenty of crops to grow and cattle to graze. So this slows the crisis that could have become a food shortage, but the drought and climate change still pose a serious problem. Luckily, back in 2020, the United States government had the foresight to harness the Great Plains' most reliable resource, wind power. The farm and grazing lands now have wind turbines set up periodically across them. These turbines do not take up much space, and they can provide huge amounts of clean, renewable energy just from harvesting the wind that blows through the region every day. This reduces the amount of fossil fuels being used by the United States, thus slowing climate change and the nasty droughts plaguing the Great Plains. More food is being grown on less land using new technology. Crops have been modified by scientists to use less water and produce higher yields. Part of the Great Plains have even moved their crops indoors using soilless hydroponic growing practices. The plants are self-sustaining, use recycled water, and require no soil at all, allowing the lands of the region to replenish their nutrients and become fertile soil again. This, in turn, leads to even more crops being grown and more food for the country. It also means there is less dust storms. It's a win-win. These sustainable practices become so efficient that prices of food in the United States actually decreases. Everyone can afford healthy United States-grown fruits and veggies. The U.S. has such a surplus of food, we begin exporting it to other countries around the world that need it. We realize that by using sustainable practices and new technology, we can end world hunger. What a time to be alive! Which future do you want to live in? If we learn from the past and what happened during the Dust Bowl, then we can stop the next food crisis before it happens. We can keep huge dust storms from ravaging the country. We can make sure everyone has access to healthy foods. The 1930s in the United States was difficult because of a lack of food and fertile soil. We can stop that from happening again, as long as we use sustainable farming practices. If you want to keep the good vibes going, check out our video Planting 20 Million Trees will actually have this impact. And if you're a little less sure about the future, maybe be prepared and watch the video What are the chances of World War III? You know, just in case. Either way, here's to a brighter future.